Hello everybody. So today we're going to talk about chapter 5, and I have divided chapter 5 into two parts. So today we're going to talk about first part of chapter 5. And chapter 5 is about access control system. Access control system. So we have mainly four things to discuss in this chapter, and today I'm going to talk about two of them. So we have four main things to discuss in chapter 5. Number one, we'll talk about the definition. We'll discuss the definition of access control. Secondly, we'll talk about some formal models of access control. And then in the next part, we will be discussing formal methods of authentication system or formal authentication systems, and we will also talk about implementing the access control. So today we're going to discuss definition of access control and some formal methods of access control. So let's start with the definition of access control. What is access control and what are the different types of access control? So you can find the definition on slide number 3. So it's basically slide 3. So definition of access control is, if you want to define access control, so access control is basically granting or denying permissions to use specific resource, or you can say equipment. So basically denying or granting permission based on some specified rules, which we will talk about, to use specific resources or equipments. Now, the access control systems can be of two types. So access control systems can be further classified into two types. There are two main types of access control systems. First type is the we can call it physical access control system. Physical access control systems, or we can call and the second type is technical, or you can say logical access control systems. Access control systems. Now, physical access controls, as name suggests, something which involves some tangible items. So physical access control systems, they use tangible systems. For example, security guards, for example, fences, or you can say door locks, etc., etc. Use a tangible system to control entry into buildings, parking lots, or protected areas. While the technical access control, logical access control, what are those? Basically, they use non-tangible systems. For example, username, password, to control access to control access of computers or networks. This is called technical or logical access control. You can say technological restrictions to control the access of computational system. For example, username, password, and all that kind of stuff. Now, access control system. Now, I'm basically on slide number 4. So on slide number 4, we discuss the different parts of access control systems. Parts of access control system. Like any access control system will have all these 4 parts that we're going to actually talk about. So what we discussed the definition of access control system, two type, physical and technical access control system, and we will be talking about the logical access control system. Physical access control system is basically the topic of physical security. So parts of the access control system. So basically any access control system, regardless of physical or the technical, any access control system mainly has four main parts or four main traits. Firstly, access control system will provide you identification. Then it will also provide you authentication. Like authentication is also a part of access control system. Then it will also have a component of authorization. And the fourth one is basically accounting, or you can say access control or accounting. That's mainly the four components. But mainly these are the three main components. So the first is identification. So accounting, or you can say the access granted. So after access is granted, accounting is basically the next part. So the next identification is basically, if you talk about identification for physical systems. So in physical system, how do we identify something? In physical, for example, if you want to get into a building, if you want to access a building or any research area, you might have to have a card, or you might have a badge. So that's the way how you can be identified. In the case of the logical systems, it could be your username, or you can say your password. So the user detail, like logical things, in fact. While authentication is basically verification of credentials, verification of credential or what you have. For example, scanning of the card, for example, username and password verification. Authorization mean how much you can access. So this particular parameter, or you can say the part, will define how much you can access with your resources or with your credentials. Like for example, user access, or you can say the instructor access and all that stuff. Access granted or accounting is basically, for example, once you get the access, so they will keep tracking your activities, what you can do or what you're doing and all that. Next is basically slide number 7. We'll talk about security kernel. So next is slide 7, security kernel. Security kernel. So kernel, I believe most of you guys are already heard about kernel in operating system. So kernel is basically the central component that allows operating system to access the hardware resources. In information security, security kernel is basically a security system. It's a security system that enforces access control to computation system or computers. So for computation system, we use security kernel, which enforces access control to computers. And please remember, it's a centralized system. Usually the security kernel is a centralized system where we have all the database and access control, authentication information all together. Let me just give you an example so you can better understand security kernel. So in security kernel, before we discuss security kernel, there are two main things that you need to know. First is subject. In access control language, subject is basically the user who wants to access the resource, and resource is called object. So object is basically a resource, equipment that we are trying to protect. So object is a resource, or it could be equipment that we are trying to protect. While user is something like a subject who is trying to access that. Now let's understand the role of security kernel, how exactly it works with example. So let's say we have a subject. So let's say this is the user or a subject. Now subject wants to access this particular object. So for example, this is the object. Subject want to access this object. So subject will make a request through interface, or you can say operating system or GUI. Subject will request to access this particular resource or this particular object. So this request will be intercepted by security kernel. So we have a security kernel, and security kernel has access to the authentication database, where we have we have stored the information like which subject can access which object can be accessed, etc. All the access control information is stored in this database. So subject request to access the object, This request will be intercepted by kernel. Kernel will refer to database and see whether this subject can access this object or not. And after, or based on the rules and based on the database, subject will then actually allow it or denies it. And after after the kernel allows the subject to access the object, then it also activate the accounting log. Start making the logs like the activities of user. So let me summarize it into a few steps that you need to know. The few steps about what we discussed. Number one, subject requests to access object. This request will be intercepted. Request will be intercepted by kernel, security kernel. Security kernel refers to database to check whether the subject has authority or subject can access or not. Subject has authority to access the requested object. And the third is based on the rules. The kernel allows or denies access. So these are the main three steps that actually security kernel, the way how security kernel works and all. So after this slide, after slide 7, slide 8 is about definitions that we already talked about. We talked about subject, user is a subject, object is a resource or equipment, and other than object and subject, there are two more conditions. One is the it's called actions, and fourth one is relationships. These are two more things, two more definitions or terminologies in access control. Action is basically activities that subject mean users, subject can do on objects. Okay, while relationship is basically, these are some optional conditions between subjects and objects, like which subject can read, which subject can write, which subject can actually execute and all that. So we use this access control system a lot. We use this access control system in our networking, even in our personal computer as well. Okay. So okay, next is the in our slide number 10, we discussed some biometric token that we already talked about. There is a term in our slide 10 which is called single sign-on. Single sign-on is basically kind of a new technology that we use in multi-vendor environment. For example, if you have multiple vendors product under one roof. For example, in GGC we have products of, we have a D2L, we have Hotmail product like Clamail, Teams and all that kind of stuff. Then we have some other stuff as well. So all these particular things are under one roof. Like GGC has everything under one roof. So we have multiple vendors product under one roof. So rather than, I mean, if you want to access D2L, if we ask you to create a new account, username and password for Hotmail, you should have a different username and password. It's going to be a mess, right? It will be really difficult for you to manage these credentials, even though you want to access the common platform, common resources. So there's a new thing which is called single sign-on, which allows the user to use single username and the password, and user can access multiple vendors product offered under one roof. Okay, that is single sign-on, and this is what we use here at GGC as well. Then coming to slide number 12. So slide number 12 is about the formal models of access control. For formal models of access control. So mainly we have four models. We'll discuss all of those four models in detail. We have four main models of access control. The first model is called DAC, short form of discretionary access control. Second model is MAC. It's mandatory access control. Third model is NDAC, which is non-discretionary access control. Then fourth model is NDAC is also known as role-based access control, role-based access control, AC. And then the fourth model is basically it's called rule-based access control model. It's also known as attribute-based access control model as well. So let's start discussing with the first one. What is a DAC model? Where do we use it? And of course, we will. I'll show you guys all these models in our lab as well. Like we will discuss DAC model. I'll make you understand that. So let's start with the first one, DAC. So discretionary access control model, first of all, what this particular model is, what's the difference between DAC and other? DAC is, first of all, the first point is in DAC, it is the least restrictive model. Least restrictive model, each object, and as you know, object is basically a resource. Each object has an owner. So owner, each object has an owner, and owner decides who can access object and how much they can access. Like read, write, execute, how much they can access. Like owner, it's the prerogative, discretion of the owner, like who can access my device. For example, you own a computer. So it's your call, your prerogative, like who can access your computer, how much they can access and all that stuff. We use this model, examples are, we use this particular model in Unix and Microsoft Windows. And if you want to see how DAC model looks like, I'll show you in the lab as well. But if you want to see that, so just create a folder on your desktop. Just create a folder on your desktop, a folder, then right click, and then you need to see the properties. Just pull up the properties, security, and then you will see the options, read, write, execute, and all that stuff. I'll show you guys in our lab as well. So least restrictive model, each object has a owner decide who can access my object and how much they can access. Again, the problem with this model, the biggest problem or issue with this model is information flow. This could be a good model in a closed environment, close proximity, like the owner use that device. If owner-based device, you have a small device and all that stuff. But information flow means someone with which you share information or data, how you can make sure that he or she will not further share it. So that's basically one of the problem. Like if you give full access to anybody, how you can make sure they will not further share the data or information with anybody else. The next model is called MAC model, mandatory access control model. So the second model is MAC, mandatory access control model. So this particular model is usually used in military